Hey friends and new acquaintances, come on in. We've saved a seat for you. Pull up a chair. Today we're going to talk about the Fellowship of the Ring deck building game. Peter Jackson's Tolkien movie theme, Dominion's deck building mechanics. Does Fellowship of the Ring deck building card game scratch the itch for the Tolkien gamer? Stay tuned and find out. If you've been around this blog and this video for a while, you'll know that we love Tolkien around here. We have several games that use the Middle-earth licenses from the books and the movies. And after all, these games often ooze theme, and you also know that I love games with a strong theme like that. Fellowship of the Ring deck building card game definitely falls into the category of game types that we're likely to enjoy. The Fellowship of the Ring deck building game certainly delivers on theme. The game uses the Peter Jackson movie license on each of the cards, showcasing an appropriate movie still shot of iconic and appropriate heroes, enemies, locations, and scenes. These pictures accompany game mechanic texts, which interact with other cards or act as power boosters or otherwise affect the players in various, usually positive ways. Cryptozoic, who produced the game, certainly did not invent the deck building game, and Fellowship of the Ring deck building game is not the first one. Generally, Dominion claims that honor as the first deck building game with widespread recognition and appeal. So, as I've asked in other reviews that we've done, does this game stand well on its own, or did the developers just clone Dominion with Orlando Bloom's face on some of the cards? Turns out Fellowship of the Ring deck building game stands quite nicely on its own as its own game. While it does share mechanics with Dominion and other deck builders, the gameplay progresses quite differently. First, players choose from among several heroes of the Lord of the Rings story, including Frodo, Aragorn, Boromir, or Sam. Each hero has a unique ability or item card which will go into his starting deck. As with Dominion, players start with identical decks of 10 cards, including 5 courage cards, which are worth 1 power each, 4 despair cards, which are worth 0 power. They're really worthless cards, and the character-specific card. These are shuffled up and make up the beginning deck. The players then draw 5 cards to start in their hands. Additionally, a deck of arch enemies is laid out with the top enemy face up. Players will each want to defeat the arch enemies by accumulating enough power in a drawn hand to match or exceed the enemy's power score, in essence buying that card for their deck. Next, the players lay out 5 cards to make up the adventure path, being available cards for purchase with the power accumulated in their hand. With enough power, a player may buy one of these cards to put in their deck to use in a future turn. Finally, a deck of identical Valor cards, which are power 2 and cost 3, is set aside for purchase, usually when there's nothing else affordable or attractive to the player. Another deck of corruption cards, which are worth -1 victory point, sits beside the Valor as an unfortunate draw deck, as various cards dictate. Gameplay begins when the starting player plays from his hand, applying the effects and adding up power. He then selects cards from the path or archenemy stack that he can afford, if any, and puts them in his discard pile for later use. Once he has played all of the cards he wishes, all the cards from his hand, even those that weren't played, go to the discard pile. He then draws 5 new cards, refills the adventure path to 5, and the next player takes his or her turn. But it's not all just a gentle game of buying and expanding. When enemies appear on the path, they often will have an ambush effect that applies to the next player. And when a player reveals the next arch enemy, their ambush affects everyone and hurts a lot more too. you'll quickly learn the value of defensive cards which allow ambush effects to be ignored. But it doesn't just end there, as the enemy cards, once they cycle back into the purchaser's hand, often have a damaging effect on the other players. These effects typically take the form of a forced discard of one or more cards from one's hand, or corruption cards gained, which reduce the player's victory score by 1 each at the end of the game. Play continues like this until a player defeats the last archenemy. At this point, the game is over and the players count up their scores. Each card displays a number at the bottom left corner, which represents victory points. The player with the most victory points wins. Let's talk about the components then for a minute. The Fellowship of the Ring deck building game is a card game. It has no other components. The game contains 226 cards as well as 7 oversized hero cards. These hero cards don't really provide any function, so could have easily been left out, but still they display an iconic shot of the hero and specify which unique character card the player starts with in their deck. Being a card game, the cards are as one might expect, being standard glossy cardstock. The images on the cards are clean and crisp stills from the movies and appropriately illustrate the text of the card for the gameplay. As always with games whose components consist mainly of cards, quality sleeves are a good investment to keep your game in good condition. The Fellowship of the Ring deck building game actually gets a relatively high amount of play at our table. As fans of both the Tolkien books and the Jackson movies, we enjoy encountering our favorite scenes and characters as they come up in the game. We rarely see disappointment among the players when this game is chosen. The strength of the gameplay displays itself in the interaction of the cards in the path. The luck of the draw guarantees a different strategy each time you play, as sometimes you will encounter more allies and other times you will encounter more enemies, and still others more artifacts. Each will acquire an understanding of the cards to maximize effectiveness, and as your familiarity with the game grows, your ability to make the most of your cards will too. The game provides a lot of fun along the way as we try to expand the power and the utility of our decks and conquer the archenemies. But don't forget, the archenemy cards you get are ultimately tools, and while they do each provide a big chunk of victory points, when the last one is defeated, the game ends. You'll want to make sure you have accumulated enough victory points to secure the win. Oh yes, and if you start getting bored with the challenge level of the game, it also comes with a sealed deck of archenemy cards that are extra difficult. We haven't even opened ours up yet, as we find the challenge level appropriate for our group. However, we may one day when we're feeling particularly masochistic. The game box says the Fellowship of the Ring deck building game should be for ages 15 and up, but as with many of our games, we find that our kids can handle this one at a much earlier age. I suspect that what best explains this, and I'm speaking in general terms now of other games as well, would not be so much the high genius level of my kids, although they are smart kids, but the fact that we've introduced them to more advanced games at an early age. This likely puts them in the mindset to understand more complicated rule sets and expect this from the games that we buy. I'd like to know, do you find that the different games' recommended ages to be generally accurate for your kids, or do they typically play them well at an earlier age? Please let me know in the comments because I'd like to know. The turns in this game move fairly quickly, so even with all 5 of us playing, downtime really remains minimal. Most of the time we're studying our cards during other people's turns and calculating power and examining the path cards. Still, the luck of the draw certainly plays a big role in the game, so familiarity and understanding of how all the cards work will greatly improve a player's performance. I think kids can still have fun with the game without knowing everything about it, but they'll certainly win more often if they know what they're doing. The Fellowship of the Ring deck building game is very mild on the content. One card does feature pipeweed, and other cards have pictures of pipe smoking, so I've dinged that slightly on the content rating. but also of the enemy cards, orcs and Nazgul. They may cause a little discomfort among younger player, and these do come up with some frequency. So let's talk about strategy now. So if we start with a beginner's tip, then if you will, as you're playing and accumulating cards, look for cards with an asterisk in the victory point slot as they come up on the path. Usually these cards will instruct you to collect 5 of a certain type, a hero, an artifact, or an enemy. If you can accomplish this by the end of the game, that card will be worth extra victory points for you, in addition to the value of the collected cards themselves. There are multiple copies of each of these collection cards, so if you can get your hands on them, you can really rack up a lot of points quickly if you can grab them and then fill those collections. As for the pro tip, I suggest that you destroy your starter cards, with the exception of the character-specific card. Because at the beginning of the game, you're going to start with 5 courage cards, 4 despair cards, and 1 unique character card. The despair cards are utterly useless. They just take up space in your hand. They give no power, and they give you no victory points. The courage, on the other hand, while they're also worth no victory points, do provide 1 power. As the game progresses, you'll gain better cards, and you ought to consider getting rid of these lesser powered ones. Your starting hand size on your turns never will exceed 5 cards, so you'll want to make those cards count. Buy cards that come out on the path that allow you to destroy cards in your hand or discard pile, and get rid of those despair and courage cards. Naturally, you'll also want to destroy any corruption cards that you may have as well. But this will leave more room in your hand for the more powerful cards that you've been buying, and will give you better chance to get those cards as you're drawing your 5. I know it seems a little bit counterintuitive to destroy the courage because they do give you power, but it only gives you 1 power, and again, you'll have much better cards in your deck very soon in this game that you'll really want to be cycling through your hand as often and as quickly as possible. So let me leave you with my final thoughts then for this game. The Fellowship of the Ring deck building game was an easy sell for me. I love Tolkien and the Peter Jackson movies, and I love the deck building game mechanic. So putting these two together made for a winning combo for me. I love the replayability of it. Even though everyone starts out almost exactly the same, the decks develop uniquely each game. The theme works great, and the pictures support the gameplay text on the cards in a sensible way. So if this all sounds good to you, then hey, I suggest you grab this one. It'll be a lot of fun. I know it is for us. All right, that'll be it for us today. So please leave me your comments and tell me, have you played this game and do you enjoy it? What's your favorite deck building game? I'd like to know. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time on Boards and Chords. Thanks for joining us on Boards and Chords. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or at our website at boardsandchords.com. We'll see you at the table.